Tessa Thorn didn't expect her new apartment to come with a broken elevator, a grumpy doorman, and a man in a three-piece suit yelling into his phone in the lobby. She shifted the last box in her arms, trying not to drop the bag of Thai takeout dangling from her wrist. The man barking into his phone paced past her, his voice sharp and low. "I said move the meeting to Tuesday. Tell the Tokyo team I'll call them from the plane. And make sure the board sees the numbers before noon, or I swear." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her struggling to press the elevator button with her elbow. His gaze swept over her messy topknot, oversized sweatshirt, and scuffed sneakers, then dropped to the box in her arms. "You need help?" he asked, voice suddenly less CO and more human. She blinked. His eyes were a ridiculous shade of green, and despite the suit and the attitude, he was stupidly good-looking. "I'm good," she said, shifting the box. "Just hoping this elevator doesn't trap me inside." He reached past her and pressed the button. "You're moving in?" "Apartment 14C," she said. "Top floor." "Well, almost. Not the penthouse or anything." He raised an eyebrow. "Lucky me." Before she could ask what that meant, the elevator dinged, the doors opened, and he stepped in first. She followed, breathing hard as she set the box down. "I'm Nolan Vale," he said casually, as if that name was supposed to mean something. "Penthouse." "Of course." The suit, the tone, the attitude, he practically screamed Penthouse. "Tessa Thorn," she said, adjusting the takeout bag. "I just moved from Queens. First week at a new job tomorrow. I'm guessing you don't work retail?" He gave a short laugh. "Not exactly." The elevator stopped on her floor. She bent to grab her box, but he beat her to it, lifting it with one hand like it weighed nothing. "Let me," he said. "Thanks." He carried it to her door and set it down. "Good luck with the new job," he said. "And the elevator." "Thanks, Mr. Penthouse." He actually smiled. "It's Nolan." She grinned and closed the door behind her, heart racing just a little. Her first week at the job was chaos: new systems, annoying coworkers, and a manager who seemed to forget her name every 5 minutes. By Friday, she was drained. As she stepped out of the elevator that evening, she nearly tripped over a white box sitting outside her apartment door. A single envelope sat on top. Her name was written in bold, clean handwriting. Inside was a note. "You mentioned Thai. Figured you might need something sweet after the week you've had. Nolan." She opened the box to find 6 glossy, perfect macarons in pastel colors. Fancy ones? Not the kind you could get at the grocery store. She stared at them, then at the note, then knocked once on the door at the end of the hall. He opened it after 2 seconds. "You bribing me with sugar now?" she asked. He leaned against the frame. Barefoot. No tie. Still somehow looked like he walked out of a GQ ad. "Did it work?" She held up a macaron. "This one's pistachio. You did your homework." He didn't answer. Just gave her a small smile. A real one this time. "Come in," he said. She hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The penthouse was a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows, black marble floors, a piano in the corner, and a dining table longer than her entire bedroom. The city glowed below them like stars had fallen and landed on the streets. "You live here alone?" she asked, still holding her box of macarons. "Yeah. Don't you get lonely?" He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," he said. Then added, "Not tonight." They sat near the window, legs crossed on the plush rug, sharing macarons and watching the traffic below. "So, what do you do, Nolan Vale of the Penthouse?" she finally asked. He glanced at her, then back at the skyline. "I run a company." She raised a brow. "What kind of company?" "Tech software, security systems, a little AI. We built the app your building uses for rent payments." She blinked. "Wait. Vale Tech? That's you?" He nodded once. She laughed. "I've been cursing that app all week. It's glitchy." He grinned. I'll have someone fix it. They talked for hours. About her job at the bookstore, about his childhood in Colorado, about how either of them really liked summer. Somehow, it didn't feel like a first conversation. It felt like something that had been waiting to happen. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the door. Thanks for the sugar bribe, she said. He leaned a little closer. Just enough to make her breath catch. Any time, Tessa Thorn. After that night, they saw each other more. It started casual bumping into each other at the elevator, grabbing coffee in the lobby, a few dinners that he insisted were just neighbors being civil. But civil didn't explain the way his hand brushed her back when they walked, or how he always made sure she was laughing before he walked away. He showed up one night with a pizza box and 2 wine glasses. I figured we both had a long day, he said as she opened the door. She let him in without thinking twice. They ate on her couch, her bare feet tucked under her, his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Why me? She asked suddenly. He looked up. You could be with anyone. But you're here, in my tiny apartment, eating pizza with me. He set his glass down. Because you're not impressed by the penthouse. Or the name. Or the money. She tilted her head. You don't even know if I like you. He leaned in slightly. Do you? She didn't answer. Just kissed him. And he kissed her back like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. By the end of the month, he knew how she took her coffee. She knew when he needed space and when he needed her to stay. He bought her a pair of noise-canceling headphones when she complained about the neighbor's dog. She bought him a plant for his office that he named Frank and never watered. They weren't official. But they were definitely something. One night, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the skyline shimmer, he said quietly, You make this place feel less empty. She turned to him. You make my life feel less stuck. He took her hand. I don't do this. Relationships. I'm not good at it. I'm not asking you to be perfect, she said. Just honest. He looked at her for a long time. Then here's the truth, he said. I think I'm falling for you. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, good, she whispered. Because I'm already in. And in that moment, under the stars and the weight of the city, the CO in the penthouse started to fall hard. Tessa yanked off her heels the second she stepped through the door and tossed them toward the corner with a sigh that could have cracked the walls. The bookstore had held a midnight release for the latest fantasy novel, and the line of costumed superfans had wrapped around the block. Her feet throbbed, her voice was hoarse, and she was certain her hair looked like it had fought a tornado and lost. She dropped her bag on the floor, turned on the lamp, and froze. A box sat on her kitchen counter. She hadn't left it there. There was no note this time, just a key with a small gold tag engraved with the letter V. Her breath caught. She looked around her apartment, then back at the key. The only person with that initial lived upstairs. She didn't have to wonder long. A soft knock echoed from the door. She opened it to find Nolan standing there, not in a suit, not even in one of his usual collared shirts, but in a black hoodie and gray joggers, holding 2 paper cups that smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I figured you'd be dead on your feet, he said, handing her one. I had a key made. Just in case. She held up the key from the box. This one? I didn't break in. Your super gave me permission. I told him you kept locking yourself out. I don't. He doesn't know that. She laughed before she could stop herself. You're ridiculous. I prefer resourceful. She stepped aside, and he walked in like he belonged there. Maybe he did. You didn't have to bring coffee. You looked like you needed it, he said, glancing at her tangled ponytail. She took a sip and sighed. Okay, fine. You're forgiven. He leaned against the counter, watching her with eyes that never missed anything. Do you always work that late? He asked. Only when dragons are involved. Dragons? Book release. Big one. Fans camped outside. One woman threatened to sue if we ran out of signed copies. He chuckled. Sounds intense. You have no idea. I had to explain to a 40-year-old man why we don't accept gold coins. He raised an eyebrow. That's new. She shrugged. You'd be surprised. She looked up at him, the tension finally starting to melt from her shoulders. What about you? What's your excuse for being awake at 2 a.m? He hesitated. There was a board meeting tonight, he said. Some people think we should expand to Europe. Others think we're moving too fast. Which side are you on? He gave a quiet laugh. Depends on the day. She sipped her coffee. And tonight? Tonight I just wanted to see you. Her chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. She walked to the couch and flopped down, legs tucked beneath her. You can sit, you know. He followed, stretching out beside her so their knees touched. Silence settled between them, comfortable. Do you ever miss it? She asked suddenly. Miss what? Being anonymous. Not having all that pressure on you. He didn't answer for a minute. There was a time when I used to fake a name in coffee shops, he said. Just so I could sit and not be approached. I miss that sometimes. She blinked. People recognize you in coffee shops? Sometimes. If I'm stupid enough to wear a watch that costs more than their rent. She stared at him. You do realize how insane that sounds, right? He laughed. Yeah. She tilted her head. Why do you do it? This whole empire thing. You could have stopped years ago, lived off your money, disappeared. He looked at her, and for the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Not vulnerability exactly, but something close. I used to think I had something to prove, he said. Now I'm not sure who I'm proving it to anymore. She reached out and touched his hand. You don't have to prove anything to me. His fingers curled around hers. I know, he said softly. They didn't talk much after that. Just leaned back, shoulders touching, her head slowly finding its way to his chest. When she finally fell asleep, his arm wrapped around her waist and stayed there until the sun came up. The next morning, she woke up alone, with a note on her nightstand and a single white tulip in a glass tumbler. The note read, Had to take a call. Back soon. She stared at the flower for a long time. By the next week, the rhythm between them had changed. Nolan started showing up at the bookstore on her lunch breaks, always in disguise, baseball cap, sunglasses, an old hoodie. It didn't help. He still looked like a man who belonged in a glass tower, not flipping through romance paperbacks in the corner. Why are you really here? She asked one afternoon as he leaned against the counter, pretending to consider a detective novel. I needed a new bookmark, he said. She folded her arms. That's not a bookmark. It could be. She narrowed her eyes. You're distracting me. I'm supposed to be restocking the new arrivals. I'll help. You've never shelved a book in your life. Then teach me. He did learn, surprisingly quickly. He even alphabetized without being asked. But halfway through the romance section, he paused and held up a book with a shirtless pirate on the cover. Is this what you read? He asked. She snatched it from his hand. No. Well, sometimes. Maybe. He grinned. You could do better than a pirate. Oh, really? Definitely. Like who? He leaned closer. Like a billionaire who brings you coffee at 2 a.m? She rolled her eyes. That's not a fantasy. That's a logistical nightmare. Still better than a pirate. She laughed, shaking her head. But that night, when she got home, there was a package on her doorstep. Inside was a book. The Billionaire and the Bookshop Girl. The dedication read, For Tessa. May your fantasies always come with coffee. Weeks passed quickly after that. They slipped into something that resembled routine, but never felt dull. He took her to a private concert on a rooftop in Soho, just the two of them and a piano player whose name she couldn't pronounce. She dragged him to a trivia night at a dive bar where he lost 3 rounds in a row and blamed the sticky tables. He brought her a painting from an art show in Berlin, flown in overnight. She surprised him with a playlist of songs she said reminded her of him, and refused to explain why. One evening, she brought him a slice of cake from her favorite bakery. He took one bite and paused. "Is this lemon? With lavender? You hate it?" He took another bite. "No. I love it." She raised an eyebrow. "You're lying." "Maybe." She laughed and stole the fork from his hand. But not everything was easy. One Thursday night, she showed up at his place unannounced. She hadn't meant to cry, but the tears came anyway. He opened the door, saw her face, and didn't ask a single question. He just pulled her in and held her. Later, when she could finally breathe again, she said softly, "My sister's sick. She didn't want me to tell anyone." He didn't say anything right away. Then, "What do you need from me?" She looked up. "Just this. Just you." He kissed her forehead. "Then you've got me." It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it felt like the most important thing he'd ever said. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't temporary. She wasn't just a girl in a small apartment, and he wasn't just a man in a penthouse. They were something else entirely. Something that neither of them had words for yet. Tessa hadn't seen Nolan in 4 days. He wasn't at the bookstore. He didn't show up at her door. No late-night coffee runs. No rooftop dinners. Nothing. The silence felt personal. She stared at her phone, not sure if she should call. The last time they'd spoken, he'd kissed her so softly it made her forget how to breathe. And then nothing. Just absence. Her sister's treatment had begun that week, and Tessa had thrown herself into hospital visits and keeping her emotions in check. She hadn't realized how much she'd started to count on Nolan being there until he wasn't. On the 5th night, she came home to find a thick envelope pushed under her door. Her name was handwritten across the front in black ink. Inside was a boarding pass. First class. New York to Florence. Departure tomorrow. Her heart skipped as she pulled out the second paper, a note, short and unsigned. "Don't pack much. Just bring yourself." She stared at it for a long time. Florence? The next morning, she stood at the terminal, clutching her passport and trying not to look like someone who was about to make a wildly impulsive decision. She spotted him near the gate, leaning against a pillar in a navy coat, phone pressed to his ear. His eyes met hers before he even ended the call. "You came," he said. "You disappeared," she replied. "I needed to think." "And you thought better in Italy?" He handed her a coffee. "I always think better with you around." "I'm not sure that's a compliment," she said, but she took the coffee anyway. He didn't explain further, and she didn't push. When the plane lifted off the runway, she looked out the window and told herself she wasn't falling deeper. They landed in Florence as the sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and violets that looked too perfect to be real. A black car waited for them outside the airport. No driver. Nolan slid behind the wheel like it was second nature. "Are we going to a hotel?" she asked. "Not exactly." They drove through narrow streets and over an old stone bridge lined with glowing lanterns. The car stopped in front of a tall villa with ivy crawling up its walls and flickering lanterns on either side of a carved wooden door. Tessa stepped out slowly. "Nolan," she said, voice low. "What is this place?" "My mother's," he said. "She left it to me." "She was Italian?" "No. She just loved it here." He led her inside, past arched doorways and warm terracotta walls. The floors were worn from years of footsteps, but the space felt alive. Personal. He didn't speak until they stood in the garden, where string lights hung in graceful curves over olive trees and a long table sat empty beneath them. "I brought you here because I needed to show you something," he said. She turned toward him, arms crossed. "You brought me across the ocean for a conversation?" He looked at her, really looked at her. There are things I haven't told you. I'm listening. He took a breath. My mother died just before I turned 21. She raised me alone. Built everything so I wouldn't have to scrape to survive like she did. But she also made sure I knew what it felt like to earn something. She bought this house the year before she got sick. Said it was the first thing she ever did just for herself. Tessa stayed quiet. She used to bring me here every summer. I hated it as a kid. No Wi-Fi. No air conditioning. But now, it's the only place I can think clearly. She walked over to the edge of the garden, where the hill dropped off into a view of the city, domes and spires rising like a painting. And you brought me here because I haven't felt this close to anyone in a long time, he said. And that terrifies me. She turned slowly. You didn't call for 5 days, Nolan. I didn't know what to say. You could have said that. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the tension in his chest, the heaviness behind his eyes. I've built something that feels like a fortress. And then you came along with your sarcasm, your bookstore job, and your completely disorganized spice rack. You went through my spices? And suddenly the walls didn't hold the same weight. I didn't know how to handle that. She studied him for a long moment. You don't need to handle it. You just need to let it happen. His mouth lifted at one side. You're not afraid? Of you? Always. But I'm more afraid of walking away without knowing what this could be. He stepped closer. I don't want to lose you. Then don't. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. He reached into his pocket and held out a small, black velvet box. She blinked. Nolan. Not what you think, he said quickly, opening it to reveal a key. To this house, he said. It's not a gesture. It's an invitation. To stay. To return. To know you belong here. She took the key in her hand. You're really bad at normal dating, you know. Hopeless. She nodded. But you're trying. He raised his eyes to hers. I'm terrified of failing. What if I'm not perfect either? Then we'll fail together. That night, they sat at the long table beneath the olive trees, eating pasta made by a housekeeper named Lucia who didn't speak a word of English but kissed Tessa's cheek like she was family. Nolan poured wine, and they toasted without saying a word. After dinner, he led her through the garden, down a narrow path lit by candles tucked into glass jars. At the edge was a small chapel, ancient and quiet. My mother used to come here every morning, he said. She stepped inside with him, breathing in the cool air and the faint scent of old stone and lavender. She said love was the only thing that made life feel less like survival. Tessa turned toward him. Do you believe that? I do now. He reached for her hand. I'm not asking for forever, he said. But I want to build a life where it's possible. She leaned into him, her voice soft. You don't have to ask. I'm already here. He kissed her then, the kind of kiss that felt like starting over. Not just with each other, but with themselves. When they returned to the villa, she stood in front of the fireplace while he lit the logs with a match from a brass tin. You're really going to make me fall in love with you in Italy? She teased. He looked up from the fire, eyes steady. I'm not making you do anything, he said. But I hope you do. She walked toward him, barefoot on the stone floor, stopping just inches away. Then maybe stop being so damn convincing. He smiled, but it wasn't cocky. It was something else. Something quieter. I don't want to win you over with flights and villas and gestures. You already have. I want you to know me. The real me. Not the CEO. Not the guy in the penthouse. I already do. He touched her cheek, reverent. Then stay. She didn't answer. She just kissed him again, and this time, it felt like a promise. Tessa stood in front of the mirror framed by carved walnut and gold leaf, the morning light filtering through gauzy curtains behind her. The villa's bedroom was quiet except for the faint rustle of olive branches outside the window. She touched the key around her neck, the one Nolan had given her in Florence, and breathed in the scent of lemon blossoms drifting in from the courtyard. She hadn't planned to stay 2 weeks. She hadn't planned to wake up in his arms every day, to laugh with Lucia over breakfast, to spend afternoons sketching by the old fountain while Nolan worked inside with a view of the hills behind him. Everything about it had felt unplanned but entirely right. But life didn't wait for anyone to settle into perfection. Her sister's final treatment was scheduled for the following Monday, and Tessa had booked a return flight to New York. She hadn't told Nolan yet. She didn't know how. He found her in the garden, barefoot in the grass, her sketchpad on her knees. He sat beside her without a word, pulling off his shoes and digging his toes into the warm earth. "You always draw in silence," he said, watching the charcoal lines take shape. "It's the only time my brain doesn't argue with me. What are you making?" She turned the pad and showed him a narrow alleyway in Florence, shadows stretching across cobblestones, laundry strung between windows. "You always notice the quiet parts of things," he said. "They're the ones people forget." He tilted his head. "Promise me something." She hesitated. "Depends on what you're about to ask. When you go back, don't let the noise pull you under." She closed the sketchpad. "You already knew I was leaving. I figured you'd want to be there for her. She's scared. And I'm the only one she trusts to sit with her through it. She's lucky to have you." Tessa turned toward him. "And what about you? I'm not the one who needs saving." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not what I meant." He looked out toward the hills. "I keep thinking about what happens after this. When we're not wrapped in candlelight and wine and distance from reality." "You mean when we're back to elevators and broken coffee machines?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly that. So ask me what you really want to ask." He met her gaze. "Do we work outside of all this?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "But only if you stop trying to control every outcome." He leaned back on his elbows, letting the sun warm his face. "That's going to be harder than you think. I never said it would be easy. You never say anything easy." She laughed, and the sound made something shift in him. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to her. "What is this?" "Something I've been rewriting in my head for weeks." She unfolded it carefully. It was a floor plan. Not for a villa. For an apartment. "Wait. Is this?" "It's the one below mine. Same layout. I bought the unit last year. Never furnished it." She stared at him. "You're offering me an apartment?" "I'm offering you a way to stay close, without giving up your space. Not penthouse, not bookstore. Just something in between." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "You want me to live in your building?" "I want you in my life, permanently. However that looks." She folded the paper slowly. "You didn't have to draw the entire layout. I didn't know how to say it out loud. So you drew walls and windows instead?" "Some people write poems. I build floor plans." She shook her head, biting back a grin. "You're impossible. But you're still here." "Yes," she said, voice soft. "I am." They sat in silence for a while. The wind moved through the olive trees, and the bells from the town below chimed once. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The next few days passed in a blur. They walked through markets, bartered for oranges and silk scarves, and chased each other through the vineyards like children. But every night ended the same way, with her tucked against his chest, his heartbeat steady under her cheek. The morning of her departure, she found a note in her suitcase. "Take the key. Come back when you're ready. Or don't wait at all. I'll be where you are." Her flight landed just before sunset. New York greeted her with honking taxis, gray clouds, and a chill she hadn't missed. She stepped into her apartment, dropped her bag, and let the silence settle. The next day, she sat beside her sister during the final treatment, holding her hand without speaking. Her sister, pale but smiling, whispered, "You look different. Happy." Tessa brushed hair from her sister's forehead. I think I am. Afterward, she walked the long way home, past the bookstore, past the park where she and Nolan had once argued about whether peanut butter belonged in croissants. Her phone buzzed once. Nolan. She didn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, she rode the elevator to the penthouse. He opened the door before she could knock. I wasn't sure if you'd come, he said. I told you I was already in. He stepped aside, and she walked into the place that had once felt like a museum, and now felt like memory. I talked to my manager, she said. I'm taking a leave of absence. Just for a while. He looked at her carefully. So you're staying? I'm moving into the unit below. He exhaled. You didn't have to. I wanted to. There was a long pause. I'm not used to people choosing me without the packaging, he said. Without the title. I didn't fall for the title, she said. I fell for the man who buys books he doesn't understand just to spend time with me. He laughed once. I never did finish that pirate novel. You never will. He stepped forward, hands slipping around her waist. You terrify me, he whispered. Good, she said, because you're starting to feel like home. He kissed her like he had nothing left to prove. No walls, no performance. Just truth. She moved into the new apartment 3 days later. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The first night, she found a gift on the kitchen counter, a single notebook, bound in leather. Inside the cover, for your stories. I hope I'm in most of them. She knocked on his door that night barefoot, holding the notebook in one hand and a bottle of cheap wine in the other. You're not allowed to make me cry before dinner, she said. He took the bottle. You're not allowed to show up looking like that and expect me not to cancel everything else. They spent the evening on his balcony, feet tangled under the table, the city blinking around them. He told her about a new project. She told him about a children's book idea she'd been toying with. I'm thinking of writing it, she said. Seriously. Do it. I'm scared. Do it anyway. She touched his face, fingertips brushing his jaw. What if I fail? I'll be here either way. The words stayed with her. That spring, her sister's health stabilized. Tessa started writing again. Nolan took fewer red-eye flights and more late breakfasts. They argued about small things: paint colors, closet space, whether or not to get a dog. They made up before midnight every time. One afternoon, she found him in the penthouse kitchen, sleeves rolled, flour on his hands. You're baking? I lost a bet. To who? Lucia. She said I'd fold before summer. I said I wouldn't. She raised an eyebrow. Fold what? He set the whisk down and turned toward her. My entire life. For you. She blinked. You made a bet about me? No. I made a bet about myself. She won. Tessa laughed, walking to him. Then I guess I should thank her. He pulled her close. You already did. That night he proposed in the apartment between the penthouse and hers. The one still empty. The one he said they could turn into something new. No big gestures. No audience. Just them, surrounded by blank walls and open light. Tessa said yes before he could finish the question. And Nolan Vale, the man who built a fortress of glass and steel around his heart, finally let someone all the way in. Tessa stood in front of the wide, floor-to-ceiling windows of the empty apartment between hers and Nolan's, what used to be a forgotten, echoing space. Now, it held the ghost of something new. Paint samples leaned against the wall, fabric swatches fanned across the floor, and a folded paper with sketches of arched doorways and built-in bookshelves sat on the windowsill. The view was the same skyline she'd once seen from his penthouse balcony, but somehow, from here, it felt more like hers too. You're thinking too hard, Nolan said from the doorway, arms crossed casually, his tie half undone. I'm thinking just enough. She turned to him with a pencil behind her ear, her hair tied up in a loose knot that had started the day as a braid. I'm not sure any amount of thought will make that mustard yellow wall work. She gestured to the swatch with mock offense. It's not mustard. It's ochre. It's an eyesore. It's warm. Inviting. It looks like someone spilled a curry nightmare down the wall. She laughed, tossing a pillow in his direction. You have no imagination. I have 5 different architects sending me mock-ups every week. I have more imagination than you think. Then use some of it here. He stepped forward slowly, picking up one of the fabric swatches. I like this one better. It was a deep peacock blue that reminded her of old libraries and midnight secrets. See? We're making progress. He drew closer, brushing a speck of paint from her cheek with his thumb. I like watching you work. You get this focused look, like you're trying to solve the world's problems with a paintbrush. I might be. He leaned in, voice lower. You already solved mine. She kissed him then, soft and quick, before pulling back with a determined glint in her eyes. We need to pick flooring next. Can't we pick dinner first? I thought we were building our future. I can't build anything on an empty stomach. Laughing, she grabbed her bag and took his hand. Fine. But we're coming back after. They stepped out into the hallway, and she caught the way he glanced at her, not the way he used to, not like she was a surprise, but like she was the answer to a question he hadn't realized he'd been asking for years. Dinner that night was at a small restaurant tucked into a corner of the West Village, the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside, just a candle in the window and the scent of rosemary and garlic wafting through the brick-lined alley. The waiter led them to a table near the back, where the walls were lined with faded photographs and handwritten recipes tucked under glass. Nolan poured the wine himself, waving off the server. You're in a strange mood, Tessa said, watching him. I'm in a good mood. That's different. He lifted his glass. To rooms with no furniture and walls we haven't painted yet. She clinked her glass to his. To mustard yellow. He groaned playfully, but the moment hung there between them, deeper than laughter. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table. What are you not telling me? He grazed her fingers with his. You'll find out soon enough. Nolan. But he only smiled and changed the subject, asking about her newest book draft, the one she'd started by hand in the villa and now filled 3 notebooks stacked on her desk. Later, as they walked through the city, the streets quiet and the air subtly shifting into the warmth of spring, he took her hand and stopped at a crosswalk. I have something I want to show you, he said. She frowned, glancing up at the buildings. At 10 o'clock at night? It's not far. He led her through a side street she didn't recognize until they reached a small, gated garden. He fished a key from his pocket and unlocked the gate. Nolan, what is this? He didn't answer, just gently tugged her inside. The garden was tiny and perfect, tucked between 2 brownstones. String lights hung from the fence, flickering like fireflies. A small table stood in the center, draped in white linen, a single candle burning on top. Tessa turned in a slow circle. Is this yours? It is now. You bought a garden? I bought the building. The garden came with it. She stared at him. You're insane. Only about you. He walked toward the table, opened a small wooden box, and pulled out a thin velvet ribbon. Wrapped inside it was a ring, delicate and simple, with a thin band of rose gold and a diamond that shimmered like the first flake of snow under streetlight. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. Marry me, he said, voice steady. She blinked, her breath caught somewhere between her heart and her throat. Not because it's the next step, or because it fits into a perfect life, he continued, but because I want to wake up beside you when your hair's a mess and your first word is always coffee. Because I want to argue over paint colors and run errands and build a home with you, not just a space, but a life that feels like ours. She stepped forward, tears stinging her eyes for the first time in what felt like months. I thought you didn't believe in forever. I didn't, he said. Until you. She took the ring from him and slid it onto her finger. Yes, she whispered. He kissed her, and the garden disappeared. The city disappeared. Everything disappeared. A year later they stood in that same garden, now transformed by wildflowers and laughter, and the scent of citrus and clove. White chairs lined the path, soft music played from a quartet tucked between rose bushes, and Tessa stood in a dress the color of moonstone, her hair in loose waves, her eyes shining. Nolan waited for her beneath the arch of olive branches and wisteria. He wore no tie, just an open collar and a look on his face that said he'd stopped breathing the moment he saw her. They said their vows in front of a small crowd. Her sister, fully recovered, beaming in the front row, Lucia, who had flown in from Florence with a jar of her famous lemon preserves, and a handful of friends who'd watched them grow from an unexpected elevator ride into something unshakable. "I vow to say yes to the wild ideas," Tessa said, her voice strong. "And to remind you that mustard yellow is still a valid design choice." He laughed, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I vow to never let you forget how brave you are," Nolan said. "And to always keep the coffee strong." They kissed under a burst of petals as the garden erupted in applause. The reception spilled into the street that night, with lanterns floating above and laughter echoing against brick. Nolan twirled her under the stars, her bare feet on his shoes, her laughter caught between his lips when he leaned down to whisper, "You made this my favorite place in the world." They moved into the apartment they built together, neither penthouse nor bookstore, but something entirely new. The walls were painted in colors they'd argued over and chosen with love, the shelves lined with books and memories, the windows always open to the hum of the city. He still brought her coffee every morning, only now it came with a kiss on the shoulder and a whispered, "I love you." She still wrote in notebooks, only now her stories ended with home. And every night, no matter where the day had taken them, they returned to each other like gravity. Because some love stories don't begin with grand intentions. They begin with a broken elevator, a borrowed box of macarons, and a man who had everything until he met the woman who taught him that love, real love, is the most extravagant thing of all. And this time, there was no question. They belong together. Always.